Hi there, folks. Tilly and I are back, and it's time for another book review. And today I am reviewing this book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis. Published, it's a fairly recent book. It's published in 2020. I probably wouldn't have known about this book. It's American, it's set in America, obviously. I would not have come across it, but it was bought for me either last Christmas or the Christmas before by my niece, who thought I might be interested in the subject matter, which I am. It's very much a book lover's book, and it's a good read. I finished it fairly quickly for me. One of those ones, particularly towards the end, where I was looking forward to picking it up, to seeing what happened next. It's a dual timeline. It's set in two time periods. The early time period is the early 20th century. It starts in 1913. And the second time period is in the early 1990s. Starting in 1993, both set in New York, and the main character in the early period is the grandmother of the main character in the second period. So family is quite a big theme in this book. So if you like books where there's a really big family theme and a connection between two separate time periods of families, then you're going to like this. Now, of course, there's a connection between the two time periods, not just the fact that the main character, Laura, is the grandmother of the main character, Sadie. But in both time periods, there's a big connection with New York Public Library. In the early time period, Laura's husband, Jack, is employed there as a superintendent. He's also a writer. And they actually live in an apartment within the library, which is really interesting. Because apparently that was historically the case. There was a special apartment for the superintendent of the library. And in the second time period, Sadie actually works at the library herself. At the beginning of the book, she is helping to put together an exhibition of old, valuable books and artifacts from the library, where obviously books are not taken out for public use. They are valuable books, mostly only looked at within the library walls. In both time periods, there is a bit of a mystery because, thank you, there are a series of book thefts of valuable books. And much of the novel is spent in trying to find out what's behind that mystery and how the two time periods kind of link up in that respect. Yes. So we have a mystery. We also have a very feminist theme. In the early period, of course, set in 1913 and 1914, thank you. The character of Laura, although happily married, 2 children, but also really wanting to forge her own way in the world. At the beginning of the novel, she is looking at the possibility of going on a journalism course. Of course, in that period, still, it was very, very controversial for women to try and forge a career for themselves. And at one point, when she's doing some reporting for part of her training, she gets involved in a women's group called the Heterodoxy Club, a group of women who are trying to campaign for women's rights, and not just things like the right to vote, but to live outside of marriage, to be able to form relationships outside of marriage, Very, very radical ideas for the period. And getting involved with this group makes Laura sort of start to question her own very conventional life of wifehood, motherhood, etc. So we've got some real points of conflict here. We've got the mystery of the book thefts, and also in both time periods there's a feeling that they are going to be suspected of the thefts. And there's also the conflict, of course, of Laura, the conflict of these new feminist ideas set against her own family and her children, etc. And it does set up quite a big conflict, and it really explores that theme for that period, which is really interesting. In the second period, we have her granddaughter, who only knows about her grandmother because her grandmother, Laura, actually later did become a famous essayist. We don't see that part of the story. We only see that in retrospect from Sadie's point of view, but she knows very, very little else about her grandmother. And she too, in many ways, although she is a woman of the 1990s and has a career and she loves her job at the library, she also has some problems with relationships. She has conflicts with co-workers, and she's also trying to work out this mystery over book thefts. So there is all that going on, and there is a romantic element as well. So it has quite a lot in it, this book. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that exploration into the difficulties for women of that early period. Women who really had a passion for things outside of marriage, while still having to live that life of motherhood and wifehood. It really explores the difficulties for women of that period, where they were still expected to be mainly a wife and mother. So the husband was not expected to share those responsibilities, but at the same time she is trying to find a way of exploring her own passions and forging some sort of career for herself, and the difficulties of that in that period. It's very much a book about family relationships, how fragile they are, how they can easily break down. It's also, of course, because of its setting, it's set mainly in the library. It's a book for book lovers. It's about old books, artifacts, librarians. So if you love the idea of a book set in a library and around books, and you're probably going to really like this. It's a book about the difficulties of being yourself and finding the strength to be yourself in a world, to some extent in both periods, and in a world that expects you to be something else. This is a book both for feminists and book lovers. I did enjoy it. I read it, as I say, I read it very quickly. I love a mystery, but one little mistake I have to point out, because these things are important to me. Early on in the book, she describes an artifact that they keep in the library where Sadie, in the second time period, is putting together an exhibition. And the artifact they have in the library is a letter opener that was owned by Charles Dickens. I looked this up after, and this is a real item held at the library. There is one little mistake around that. In the book, she dates it as 1882, and I immediately jumped on that thinking, well, that can't possibly be right, because Charles Dickens died in 1870. So when I finished the book, I looked all this up, and I think that 1882 is a typo rather than an actual mistake around dates, because when I looked at it on the website of the New York Public Library, I found it's dated 1862, which makes a lot more sense. But if you're reading the book, and if you're not reading, I don't know whether there is a later edition yet, but just beware of that. 1882 is not right. It sounds really finicky of me, but these things are important. You know, as I'm a Charles Dickens fan, and I write historical books myself, I'm a kind of stickler for things like that. However, I do know how easy it is to make mistakes. I'm sure that there are things in my books where I've made errors. In fact, I know there is one. Somebody wrote to me and said that in my book, Dark River, there's a section set in prehistoric Britain where I mention rabbits. Now, apparently there are no rabbits in prehistoric Britain. There were hares, no rabbits. But there you are. It's so easy to make these mistakes. Just a little error. But apart from that, I really, really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis. I have a little addendum to that story. I wrote to Fiona Davis. I sent her an email this morning and just pointed out that little error because I couldn't let it go. And I had a lovely email back from her saying how grateful she was for me to point it out. Apparently, I'm the first person since the book was published in 2020 to actually point that out. And she was so gracious about it. So there you go. Lovely person. I should be writing back to her again. Now, I've already started reading my next book that I'll be reviewing in probably a short amount of time too, maybe a couple of weeks' time. And it's About a Boy by Nick Hornby. I love Nick Hornby. I also love the film with Hugh Grant and Nick Holt, the very young Nick Holt. I've seen that film several times, so I've been really looking forward to reading the book. I quite enjoy reading books after seeing the film to see what the original was like, although the trouble with doing it that way around is you can't help visualising the actors. So, but, you know, that's okay because, you know, Hugh Grant, why not? Eye candy for the mind as you're reading. I've already had a laugh out loud moment in this book already. There's another one. So yeah, I will enjoy bringing you my review of that when I'm finished. And my next video will probably be another from my A to Z of authors series. So look out for that. So that takes us up to getting close to October, possible Halloween section coming up soon. Gosh, time flies. If you want to see my last book review, which was, what was it? Charles Dickens. It was The Old Curiosity Shop. That'll be coming up here. In the meantime, please don't forget to subscribe. And also, yeah, let me know what you thought of this book too, if you've read it. I'll see you again soon. From Tilly and me. Bye for now.